Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, well, listen, yeah, you guys have fun if you can. No, I'm gonna finish working on a letter that I've been writing. Yeah, that's right. I still like to proofread by, reading it aloud to myself before I send it. Okay, love you. Yeah, talk to you again soon. Yeah, bye bye. Okay, let's see. No. Dear Dad, I was flattered recently when Frank Wyndham, our old friend and colleague, asked me to write a brief devotional to share with the congregation that he's pastoring these days. He's at Avondale Patillo UMC, and he wants to include it in their Holy Week Lunch Lift series. It's a very strange Holy Week this year, what with COVID 19 and the novel coronavirus pandemic. Churches, pastors, and congregants alike are having to find new ways of gathering the body of Christ together. And like almost everything else, this devotional will be delivered online via the congregation's website. Before I go too much further, there's something that I need to share with you, Dad. Don't be worried, but I need to tell you that a week ago I received the news that my stage 3 adenocarcinoma has returned. My colon cancer's back, is what I'm saying. We're looking to schedule surgery as soon as the pandemic situation allows St. Joseph's to begin doing cancer surgeries again. Facing surgery, recovery, and the likelihood of more chemotherapy, I've had lots of folks contacting me saying something along the lines of, I don't know how you do it. Which meaning, I suppose, how do you keep going in the face of everything? My answer, which I have borrowed from a meme in an online cancer recovery community, is simple. I wasn't given a choice. I may share that idea in my devotional. It seems applicable to all of us right now. I think I'll share something from Tolkien too. Remember when I was a kid and I loved to read J.R.R. Tolkien? Years later, you and I watched some of the movies together. Do you recall when it's in The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's protagonist Frodo laments, I wish these events need not have happened in my time. To which Gandalf, the voice of wisdom, responds, so do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. I think that I want to talk about how none of us would choose the difficulties that surround us in our stormy present. Sometimes we feel as if the present circumstances will overwhelm us, but none of us would choose such times. But we do get to decide how we will respond to them. It makes me think about how in Stephen ministry training, caregivers are taught to encourage their care receivers to see that regardless of the challenges we face or the fear and the brokenness that we feel, we remain capable nonetheless of being response-able. Emphasis on the word able, meaning that we remain free to respond even when grief and hurt and anxiety, when panic and isolation and dread make us feel shackled and bound. I believe that a message of Holy Week, a key message, especially right now, needs to be a reminder that the way of Christ is the way of choice and of freedom and of life rather than slavery and death. You may also remember from your time pastoring how Stephen Ministry caregivers are taught that the Chinese character for the English word crisis is made by combining two pictograms, one representing the concept of danger and the other opportunity. Well, more accurately, the pictogram for opportunity might be better rendered as changing point or juncture. And thus, the word crisis becomes danger at the point of juncture. It makes me think of a crossroads, which is itself redolent with Holy Week imagery. I used to teach my Stephen Ministry trainees that it's as if the word crisis or danger at the point of juncture was represented by an inverted triangle standing precariously perched on its apex point, with danger to one side and opportunity and juncture, changing point on the other. And my point then, and will be in my devotional, is that institutions and individuals alike need to remember that when crises arise, opportunity, the changing point, is often found just on the other side of danger, and that we, each and every one of us, can be a part of helping to tip the balance of the triangle away from danger and towards a future of greater stability and wholeness for everyone. You know, we're living in historic times, and that's made me spend some of my own time thinking about the virtues, the qualities of leadership that seem to be most needed right now. As I used to tell our program staff at Must, whether it was during the response to the Great Recession or the massive dislocation of domestic refugees after Hurricane Katrina, I'd say you can lay your wearied head to rest tonight knowing that in years to come, you'll be able to tell the story of how you served during a time of real crisis. And you can know that you too played your part. But times like these will ask of us that we make a choice to be encouraging, gracious, resilient, and humble. Encouraging, Dad, because it literally, of course, means to give heart to another. Our own courageousness is important, since each of us is a beacon to someone else. Whomever you are, someone in our family, our community, or our organization is looking to us for encouragement during these dark days. And we want to be prepared to give that encouragement when needed. Gracious because all of us, our families, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, even our enemies, are hurting. And that should never be ignored. I think discipleship demands that we allow space for folks to be broken when they are broken. We need to allow space for people to grieve, for envision futures that are gone, for friends who are distant or departed, for markets that have collapsed. We need to have the compassion to hold one another when we fear the threats of a menacing, invisible, viral enemy and the chaos that follows in its wake. Let's be compassionate with one another and remember that others are hurting too, and that that's okay. Graciously affording them time for rest and replenishment when they get weary or feel broken down, and compassionately helping them to get back up on their feet and get back to it, get back to the struggle as soon as they're able. Resilient, because like it or not, the world around us has changed, and nor will it likely return to the way that it was. Ready or not, we must become more adaptive than ever before. I think particularly, Dad, about all of those of us who have found our vocation in serving churches or in other faith-based institutions. The test of our leadership in these days, as well as that of the congregation, is going to be dependent on our ability to creatively consider reconfiguring what we do and how we do it, on our willingness to say yes to new opportunities, and our wisdom to know when we would be wise to remain silent and allow someone else to lead or serve. And most importantly, and most appropriately for a Holy Week devotional, I want to talk about being humble, of practicing the virtue of humility. You know, it was something Joe said in his Palm Sunday sermon this past week that really got me thinking about humility in regards to Holy Week. His text was, of course, Matthew 21, and the story was about Bethpage and the Mount of Olives, of the disciples rounding up transportation for Jesus and Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. In his FaceTime video sermon, Joe began by reminding us of a story he had once told the congregation. He was remembering a Palm Sunday dream that you'd shared with us, one that you'd had some years ago. In this dream, you were standing in the back of a sanctuary, shaking hands with worshipers as they left following services, except that in this dream, you suddenly became aware that you were a donkey. Now, that's a strange dream, and if you were here, I'm sure that you'd love to play armchair psychiatrist and do a little dream analysis on it, but that's going to have to wait for another time. What Joe said that he remembered most from your conversation about the dream was this. You said, you knew that at your very best, the most that you could ever possibly be is the donkey that Jesus rode in to Jerusalem on. That image has stayed with me. It stayed with me all Sunday and lingers into today. I think it captured so beautifully the most important thing, the thing that helps me make sense of this Holy Week in the time of coronavirus. It says something important about humility. For who hasn't felt humbled by the way that world roiling events have changed things in the past 6 weeks? Who hasn't found that something they believed in, trusted in, stood upon has been rattled to its foundations? To a greater or lesser degree, everything, it seems, has been shaken. Markets have crumbled in a matter of days. Regular social life and comforting routines have been halted. For those of us who look to government for security, we've seen that fail to protect us. For those of us who believed, even idolized, in the capitalist economic model, we've seen that. We've seen that being the richest society in the history of the world has not kept us safe. And for those of us who worship the idea of progress itself, we who place our faith in the world's technocratic and our scientific advances, even we have been humbled at the rapidity with which this pandemic has changed our reality. Whatever else we've learned that none of us are impervious. If ever there were a time to move into Holy Week with humility, then this is surely it. I've also been thinking today about the canonic hymn found in the letter to the Philippians. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, Paul writes. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. In humility, value others above ourselves. It sounds like the perfect corollary to the latter part of what Jesus called the great commandment, and love your neighbor as yourself. If there's one thing that consistently inspires me to keep going in the face of loss, cancer, economic difficulty, career uncertainties, dreams deferred, envisioned futures gone, it's this. Everywhere I look, I encounter people taking actions that may be difficult, sacrificial even, and not for themselves but for the sake of others. It isn't everyone all the time, but it is everywhere. Earlier, I was writing about the way of Christ being the way of choice and of freedom and of life rather than slavery and death. And that's true. And hearkening back to Joe's sermon, though, from Palm Sunday, he reminded us that Christ often calls us to sacrifice some of our personal liberty in the name of loving and caring for the other. Love over liberty. You know, I've thought a lot about 2019 recently. Most of that year I was either recovering from surgery or undergoing chemotherapy. Dad, I'll never be able to adequately express how much I felt your love made real to me during that time when you were providing for my care. But my heart is warmed whenever I think about it. And I'm so grateful that I got better in time to act as your caregiver during your own fight with cancer. It was as if the role of servant had been passed from you to me, and it makes me pray that perhaps what this pandemic will release upon the world is a cascade of love, a cascade of humble and sacrificial service. If ever there were a time that it was needed, if ever there were a time when it feels like maybe we're right on the brink of it happening, 'tis now. We all know where Holy Week is headed. Jesus told his disciples, "Greater love has no man than this, to lay down one's life for his friends." You know, the story doesn't end with sacrifice, but sacrifice is where we are headed this Holy Week. And that rings true, very true, in our stormy present. Thanks for letting me spend a few minutes with you this morning, Dad. I miss you and Mom every day, and I love you with all of my heart. As I find myself repeating these days, whatever comes, love anyway. Love wins. Grace and peace be with you. Your son, Andy.